July 3rd, 1945, 09:30 hours, Yorkshire, England. The courtyard smelled of wet stone and coal smoke. 68 women stood in formation, 3 rows deep, their backs straight despite exhaustion. The morning rain had stopped, but the ground was still slick with mud. In front of them, a British officer, a colonel, medals across his chest, paced slowly, his boots leaving prints in the gravel. Behind him, a line of guards stood at attention, rifles held at their sides. The women waited. They had been told nothing. Just formation at 09:30, full assembly, no exceptions. Now they stood in silence, watching the colonel's face for a hint of what was coming. His expression gave nothing away. He stopped pacing. He turned to face them. He cleared his throat. "You have been here for 6 weeks," he said in deliberate German. "You have worked. You have followed the rules. Today we acknowledge that." He gestured to the guards. They moved forward, not toward the prisoners, but past them, toward a table that had been set up at the far end of the courtyard. On it, boxes, wrapped in brown paper, stamped with red crosses. The women stared. One, a radio operator named Inga, felt her breath catch. She thought, "This is the trick. This is where it turns," but it did not turn. The colonel nodded. "Step forward when your name is called. You will each receive a care package. Contents, soap, chocolate, cigarettes, writing paper, courtesy of the Red Cross and His Majesty's government." Ing heard the words but could not process them. A gift? For prisoners? It made no sense. The first name was called. A woman stepped forward, trembling. A guard handed her a box. She took it. She did not open it. She just held it, as if it might disappear. The second name. The third. One by one, the women stepped forward and received their boxes. One by one, they returned to formation, clutching brown paper and red crosses like lifelines. When Inga's name was called, she walked forward on legs that felt borrowed. The guard, a young man with kind eyes, handed her the box and said, "There you are, miss. Miss. Not prisoner. Not enemy. Miss." She took the box. It was heavier than she expected. She whispered, "Thank you." The guard nodded. "You're welcome." She returned to her place in line and thought, the war is over. It must be. Because this cannot happen in war. If this moment already changed how you see the war, subscribe. The next will surprise you even more. They had been auxiliaries, members of the Luftwaffenhelferinnen and Marine Helferinnen, women who had operated radios, plotted ship movements, decoded signals, and staffed administrative posts for the Luftwaffe and Kriegsmarine. They hadn't carried weapons, they had not flown planes or commanded ships, but they had worn uniforms, taken oaths, and served a regime that was now ash and accusation. Ing had joined in 1943 at 21 because her father, a schoolteacher, had been conscripted and she needed to support her mother. They trained her in Morse code and stationed her at a naval communication post near Kiel. For 18 months, she transcribed messages she did not fully understand, routing orders between U-boats and command. She did not ask questions. Questions were dangerous. By April 1945, the post was rubble. The U-boats were gone. Ing and the others were ordered to retreat west toward British lines, in the desperate hope that surrender to the Anglo-Americans would be less brutal than capture by the Soviets. They walked for 8 days, sleeping in ditches, eating whatever they could find. On the 9th day, they crossed a bridge and found British soldiers waiting on the other side. A captain with a Scottish accent had processed them, names, ranks, units, and loaded them onto trucks. "You're prisoners of war," he said. "You'll be transported to England for detention. Behave, and you'll be treated fairly." Ing had not believed him. She had been told too many lies to trust a promise from an enemy officer, but she had climbed into the truck anyway because there was no other choice. The journey to England had been long and strange. First a train to the coast, crowded, cold, the windows painted black. Then a ship across the North Sea, a converted cargo vessel that pitched in the swells, making half the women sick. Ing stood on deck as the English coast appeared through the mist, and she thought, "I am going to die in a foreign country." But she did not die. She was processed at a port, given a number, and loaded onto another train. This one travelled north, through countryside that looked impossibly green, impossibly intact. Villages with church spires, fields with sheep. It was as if the war had never touched this place. The camp was a converted estate on the edge of Yorkshire, a manor house surrounded by barracks, vegetable gardens, and a low stone wall. There were guards, but no barbed wire. There were rules, but no cruelty. It felt like a paradox. On the first night, Ing was assigned a cot in a barracks with 20 other women. A corporal handed her a blanket, a towel, and a bar of soap. "Supper's at 1800, he said in broken German. "Don't be late." She was not late. Supper was stew, thin but warm, and bread that was not mouldy. She ate slowly, waiting for someone to take it away. No one did. The first act of kindness came 3 days later. Ing was assigned to the laundry, washing sheets and uniforms in great tubs of hot water heated by coal fires. The work was hard, but it was purposeful. It gave her something to do with her hands. On the third day, a guard, a private named Collins, young with a Midlands accent, brought her a cup of tea. He set it on the edge of the tub and said, "Thought you might need this." She stared at the cup. Tea. For a prisoner. She looked up at him, confused. He shrugged. "It's cold in here. Tea helps." He walked away before she could respond. She picked up the cup and held it in both hands, feeling the warmth seep into her palms. She thought, "This is not how enemies behave." "He brought me tea," she wrote later, in a letter to her mother that took 9 months to arrive. "I did not know what to say. I still don't." The system behind this decency was not sentiment. It was doctrine, rooted in the Geneva Conventions, codified in War Office directives, and enforced by officers who understood that how you treated prisoners reflected who you were. A memo issued in 1940, circulated to every POW camp in Britain, contained a principle that would define the treatment of hundreds of thousands of enemy soldiers. Prisoners are soldiers, not slaves. They will be treated with dignity, consistent with security. The logic was triad-shaped. Security. Well-treated prisoners did not riot, did not rebel, did not require violence to control. Diplomacy. The enemy held British soldiers, and reciprocity was survival. How you treated their prisoners determined how they treated yours. Morality. Because if you won the war by abandoning decency, you lost the thing you were fighting to preserve. It was not perfect. There were camps where guards were harsh, where food was scarce, where the rules were ignored. But the system as a whole held. By the summer of 1945, Britain held over 400,000 German POWs. Most were fed, most were housed, most survived. In a war defined by brutality, that was a kind of miracle. The days settled into rhythm. Mornings began with roll call, names read from a ledger, faces checked against a list. No shouting, no intimidation. Then breakfast, porridge, toast, tea. The food was plain but consistent. The women learned to trust that it would appear again tomorrow. After breakfast, work details. Some women worked in the gardens, planting vegetables and tending rows of beans and carrots. Others worked in the kitchen, the laundry, the repair shop. The work was necessary, it kept the camp running, but it was also purposeful. The British believed in structure. Idle hands bred despair, work bred routine, and routine was a kind of survival. Ingd remained in the laundry. She scrubbed uniforms beside a woman named Lena, older, steady, a former clerk from Bremen. They did not talk much at first. There was too much to process, too much silence to fill. But after a week, Lena said, quietly, "Do you think they'll send us back?" Inga looked up from the tub. "I don't know." Lena nodded. "I don't know if I want to go back. There's nothing left." Inge thought about Kiel, about the rubble, about her father who had not written in over a year. She thought, she's right, there's nothing left. But she did not say it. She just kept scrubbing. One afternoon, a guard, Sergeant Miller, older, with a kind face, brought a box of books to the barracks. He set it down and said, in halting German, "For reading, if you want." The women stared at the box. Books, in German, Goethe, Schiller, Heine, classics, not propaganda, not censored, just literature. Inga picked up a copy of Faust and opened it. The pages smelled of old paper and dust. She had not read for pleasure in over 2 years. She sat on her cot and read the first page, then the second, and before she knew it, an hour had passed. That night she read by candlelight until her eyes burned. She read because it reminded her that she had once been a person who read books, who thought about things other than survival. "They gave us books," she wrote. "I had forgotten that words could be beautiful." In August, the Red Cross began processing mail. Inga was called to the administrative office and handed an envelope, her mother's handwriting. She stared at it, unable to believe it was real. The lieutenant behind the desk said, "You can write back. We'll help you send it." She took the envelope to the barracks and opened it with shaking hands. Her mother was alive. Her father was missing, presumed dead. Her brother, younger, conscripted at 17, was in a Soviet camp, location unknown. Ing read the letter 3 times. Then she sat down and wrote a reply. She told her mother she was safe, that she was fed, that the British were treating her fairly. She did not mention the fear, the guilt, the crushing weight of not knowing if any of this mattered. She mailed the letter the next day. It arrived in Germany 4 months later. Her mother kept it for the rest of her life. Private Collins approached Ing one day while she was hanging sheets on the line. He pulled a photograph from his pocket and held it out. "My daughter," he said. Ing looked at the photograph. A little girl, maybe 5, with curly hair and a gap-toothed smile. She looked up at Collins. "She's beautiful," he smiled. "She is. Haven't seen her in 2 years, but I will soon." Ing nodded. She thought about saying something, about her own family, about loss, about the unbridgeable distance between enemy and enemy. But she did not. She just said, "You're lucky." He tucked the photograph away. "Yeah, I am." The next day, he brought her an extra bar of soap. He did not explain why, he just set it on the edge of the tub and walked away. "If you're seeing this war in a new light, subscribe. The next scene will challenge you even more." The shift was gradual. Ing had been told for years that the British were monstrous, that they bombed cities without mercy, that they treated prisoners like animals, that surrender meant death or worse. She had believed this because everyone believed this, because the propaganda had been relentless, because doubt was dangerous. But the British did not act like monsters. They acted like men who were tired and decent and trying to go home. They brought tea and books and photographs of their daughters. They said, "Please" and "Thank you." They acknowledged work with care packages stamped with red crosses. The propaganda cracked. Not all at once, but piece by piece like plaster falling from a ceiling. One day, Inga realized she was no longer afraid of the guards. She was just tired. And tired was better than terrified. In December, the camp held a Christmas service. A chaplain, an Anglican priest with a gentle voice, conducted the service in the manor's old chapel. He read from the Bible, led a hymn, and spoke briefly about hope. Not victory, not judgment, just hope. Afterward, there was a meal. Roast beef, potatoes, gravy, mince pies with cream, more food than Inga had seen in years. The women ate slowly, savouring every bite, aware that this was an act of generosity they did not deserve and had not earned, but were receiving anyway. The chaplain moved among the tables, speaking quietly to the women. When he reached Inga, he paused. "How are you managing?" he asked in careful German. She thought about lying. Instead, she said, "I don't know." He nodded. "That's all right, none of us do. But we're here, that's something." It was the truest thing anyone had said to her in years. Repatriation began in January 1946. The women were called in groups, processed, given papers, sent back to Germany or to displaced persons camps if they had nowhere to go. Inga was in the 4th group. She packed her small bundle, a comb, a bar of soap, the copy of Faust that Sergeant Miller had told her to keep. Private Collins gave her a tin of biscuits on the morning she left. "For the journey," he said. She took the tin. "Thank you," she said. "For everything." He shrugged. "Just did what anyone would do." But that was not true. Most people would not have brought tea to an enemy. Most people would not have shared photographs or books or kindness. Most people would have looked away. Collins had not looked away. None of them had. Ing found her mother in Bremen in March 1946. The city was rubble, but her mother was alive. They held each other and cried and did not speak for a long time. There was too much to say and no words large enough. Ing stayed in Germany. She worked as a translator for the British occupation forces, then as a librarian in a school. She married in 1952, a teacher, quiet, decent, and had 2 children. She kept the copy of Faust on her bookshelf for the rest of her life. She never spoke about the war, but every Christmas she made mince pies and thought about a chaplain who had said, "We're here, that's something." In 1995, she returned to England. She took a train to Yorkshire and found the old estate, still standing, converted into a nursing home. She walked through the courtyard where she had once stood in formation, waiting for punishment, and received a box stamped with a red cross instead. She stood there for a long time, remembering. Then she left. The colonel had lined them up. The women had braced for punishment, for humiliation, for the cruelty they had been promised. What they received instead was a box, brown paper, red cross, soap and chocolate, and writing paper. If this story reminded you that history is written in gestures as much as battles, subscribe. You'll find more truths here than in any textbook. In 2008, Inga died peacefully in her sleep. Her children found a box in her closet, letters, photographs, and a tin of biscuits, empty but carefully preserved. One letter, written but never sent, was addressed to Private Collins. It said, in careful English, "You brought me tea. You showed me your daughter. You treated me like a person when I had stopped believing I was one. Thank you." The children tried to find him. They could not. But they kept the letter anyway because some gratitude does not need a recipient. It just needs to be spoken. The courtyard had smelled of wet stone and coal smoke. The women had stood in formation waiting for the worst. What they received was a box. And in that box, wrapped in brown paper, stamped with hope, was the answer to a question they had stopped asking. Are we still human? The war had taught them fear. The peace taught them mercy. And mercy, they learned, was not the absence of punishment. It was the presence of acknowledgement. A colonel who said, "We see your work." A guard who said, "Here's some tea." A system that said, "You are soldiers, not slaves." That was civilization. Not the treaty, not the parade, just this, a box, handed across the gap between enemy and enemy, and the quiet refusal to let hatred be the final word.